The air left my lungs, so fast I had to lock my knees to stay upright. My mother's dining room was washed in that cold white chandelier light she'd always called elegant, the kind that bounced off polished mahogany and glossy framed photographs until every smile on the wall looked sharp enough to cut. My father stood at the head of the table with one hand flattened over a stack of printed bank statements. My brother Travis leaned against the marble buffet, jaw working, thumbs hooked in his belt loops like he'd been waiting all morning for a fight. My Aunt Miriam had both palms pressed to her chest in rehearsed outrage, and my mother, still wearing the pale blue cashmere cardigan I'd bought her last Christmas, wouldn't look me in the eye. "Don't," my father said, before I'd even stepped fully inside. He lifted one finger toward me like a judge delivering sentence. "Put the flowers down and explain yourself." The peonies slipped in my grip, cool stems wet against my palm. Behind him, the brunch I had been told wasn't happening was already laid out in neat white serving dishes, ham glaze catching the light, silver warming tray, orange juice sweating in crystal pitchers, place cards, 8 of them. Travis slapped the papers with the back of his hand. "You thought we wouldn't find out," he snapped. "You thought you were slick. My name is Elena Claire Hale. I'm 34, and this is the story of how my family tried to erase me on Mother's Day, and how I made sure the truth cost them everything they built on lies." I had gotten the text from my mother at 7:12 that morning, while I was still piping mascarpone frosting onto lemon muffins in my apartment kitchen in South End. 3 words first. "Don't come today." Then, a minute later, a longer message. "We're tired of you. Stop forcing yourself where you're not wanted." It was so unlike her that I read it 5 times with my phone cold in my hand and the mixer still humming on the counter. My mother used too many commas in every text. She signed them with hearts. She had never once written "stop forcing yourself" anywhere. That sounded like Travis. Or worse, like my father when he wanted to sound like Travis. So I came anyway. And now there they all were, gathered in my parents' Concord dining room beneath the chandelier crystals and the smell of rosemary ham, staring at me as if I were an intruder in the house where I'd learned to walk. "Go ahead," Aunt Miriam said, turning slightly so she could make sure my cousin Bethany, my Uncle Peter, and 2 church friends in the doorway had a clear view of her injured expression. "Tell us why you've been stealing from your own parents." I set the flowers down carefully on the foyer table beside the brass bowl of old keys. Then I placed the muffin box next to them. The cardboard made a soft, ridiculous sound against the marble. I remember that because everything else in my body had gone very still. "Stealing," I repeated. My father pushed the bank statements toward the edge of the table. "Transfers, appointments with attorneys, draft deed paperwork. You went behind our backs and tried to take control of our assets." My mother finally looked up then. Her mouth was drawn tight, lipstick fading at the edges. She kept twisting the silver ring on her right hand, the one she always touched when she was scared. "Mom," I said evenly, "did you ask them all here for this?" Her eyes slid away from me. Travis answered instead. "She doesn't owe you an explanation," he said. "Not after what you've done." The room had that over-air condition bite old houses get when every vent is blowing at once. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hall and the soft hiss of the warming tray fuel under the brunch chafers. Nobody moved toward me. Nobody offered a seat. They'd arranged the whole thing like an execution and expected me to provide the panic. "What exactly do you think I did?" I asked. Travis grabbed 3 pages from the stack and held them up with a triumphant little flick, his wedding band catching the light. "You met with some estate attorney in Back Bay. Twice. You had Mom's login information. And somebody drafted preliminary property transfer forms on this house. Don't insult us. We have proof." He said proof like a man tasting a word he'd wanted to use for weeks. Bethany, who never met a family disaster she didn't want front row seats for, folded her arms and tilted her head. Uncle Peter stayed near the archway, rubbing his chin. My father planted both hands on the mahogany table and leaned forward. He had that flush look he got when he thought moral outrage made him look righteous. "We trusted you," he said, "after everything we've done for you." There it was. Not love. Not concern. Debt. The family's favorite language. "Everything," Aunt Miriam echoed, gathering closer, black patent heels striking the wood floor like a metronome. "Your mother is in tears. Richard is humiliated, And on Mother's Day of all days, you're trying to strip them of their home. Of all days, Bethany murmured, because she liked to decorate cruelty with little ribbons. I looked at the table again. 8 place cards in my mother's handwriting. Richard, Donna, Travis, Kelsey, Miriam, Peter, Bethany, Pastor Lee, not Elena. That small detail landed harder than the accusation. It was the administrative neatness of it. The decision had been made in ink. I was not expected. I was not included. I was supposed to stay away, let the rumor take root, and maybe spend the day staring at my phone wondering what I'd done wrong. Instead, I stepped into the room and slid my purse strap off my shoulder. My father misread that movement and drew himself up, ready for drama. Travis smirked. Aunt Miriam actually inhaled, waiting for a scene she could repeat later. I set my purse on a dining chair. Then I took off my coat, folded it over the back, and looked at my mother again. "Did you send that text yourself?" I asked quietly, "or did someone write it for you?" The silence that followed was absolute. Travis barked a laugh too quickly. "Oh, here we go." "Answer her," my father said to my mother, but his voice had thinned at the edges. Mom pressed her lips together. "I approved it, not wrote it." A small, hard click happened somewhere inside me then. Not anger. Confirmation. For the last 6 weeks, tiny things had been out of place. My mother missing 2 dermatology appointments she'd never miss. My father suddenly insisting all bills were being streamlined. Travis dropping by their house 3 times in 1 week, even though he lived 40 minutes away, and called duty a burden when it involved anyone but himself. And then, 3 Mondays earlier, when I stopped by to fix my mother's laptop, I noticed the browser history had been scrubbed but not well enough. Mortgage refinance. Transfer deed template Massachusetts. How to revoke access to family Apple account. I had started paying attention the way I always did when people underestimated me. "Let me save everyone some time," Travis said, taking 2 steps toward me. He smelled like cedar cologne and impatience. "You got too involved. You thought because you help people at your little law office, you could come do it here. This is our family, not one of your files. My little law office. I was senior case manager for Whitmore and Sloan's fiduciary litigation team. Half my job was recognizing financial abuse before the victims themselves could name it. The other half was documenting it so carefully nobody could talk their way out of it later." I didn't correct him. My mother's hands were trembling now. My father noticed and pulled her chair slightly back from the table, a gesture that would have looked protective to anyone who didn't know him. To me it looked like positioning. He always liked people seated when he spoke over them. "Elena," he said, taking on the deep, disappointed tone he used for public discipline, "if you admit this now, if you apologize, maybe we can handle it privately." That almost made me smile. Handle it privately meant bury it. "Privately," I repeated. "Yes," he said, "for your mother's sake. Not for the sake of truth. Not for the sake of peace. For control. Always control." Aunt Miriam stepped in closer, bracelets clinking. "You need help, honey. You've been obsessed. Calling too often. Monitoring things. People have noticed. People. In our family, people was always code for whatever lie had enough witnesses to pass for history." I looked past her at the kitchen doorway. Kelsey had just appeared there, one hand wrapped around a coffee mug she wasn't drinking from. My brother's wife. Long dark hair twisted into a loose knot. Green silk blouse. Pale face. She met my eyes for half a second, then looked down. Interesting. Because Kelsey hated these scenes. She usually stayed upstairs until the screaming was done. If she was here now, in sight line, mug untouched, shoulders tight, that meant one of 2 things. She was trapped, or she was waiting. My father shoved the bank statements forward again. "Say something." So I did. I pulled out a chair and sat down. It wasn't dramatic. That was the point. With legs whispered over the hardwood floor. I crossed one ankle over the other and rested my hands in my lap. The whole room had been leaning toward an explosion, and instead I gave them stillness. They looked almost offended by it. Then I said, "Before we go any further, nobody touches those papers again." Travis scoffed. "You don't give orders here." I looked at him the way I looked at witnesses who forgot themselves on cross. Calm, steady, unblinking. "Actually," I said, "I do now." My father's face darkened. Aunt Miriam drew back. Bethany's eyes went bright. My mother stopped twisting her ring. I let the implications settle over the room, then reached into my purse and placed my phone on the table beside the bank statements, screen down. Go ahead, I said. Show everybody your proof. What they didn't know was that I had spent the last month preparing for this exact kind of betrayal. They thought they were springing a trap on Mother's Day. They had no idea I'd already mapped the exits. Travis liked an audience. That was his first mistake. He picked up the pages again with a flourish, like a mediocre magician who thought confidence could replace skill. These transfers, he said, jabbing a finger at the printouts, started in February. Small enough not to attract attention. 500 here, 900 there. Then attorney consultations in March. Then draft property forms, downloaded in April. You were setting up to transfer this house. He slapped the last page on the table and looked around, making sure everybody registered the accusation before landing his eyes on me again. Tell me I'm wrong. I did not answer immediately. Instead, I reached for the crystal water glass at the place, setting that should have been mine, and took one slow sip. The water tasted faintly metallic, too cold, with that over-chilled flavor expensive houses always mistake for refinement. Across from me, Aunt Miriam was practically vibrating. Well, she demanded. I set the glass down. You are wrong in 3 separate ways, I said. Travis opened his mouth, but I lifted one finger. First, those transfers were not made by me. They were made from an IP address registered to this house, using Mom's iPad between 11:14 p.m. and 11:31 p.m. on February 6th, February 18th, and March 3rd. I know that because I requested the device activity log from the bank's fraud team last Tuesday after I noticed the first discrepancy. My father's posture changed, so slightly most people would have missed it. His shoulders drew inward by less than an inch. But I saw it. Second, yes, I met with an estate attorney in Back Bay. Naomi Villas, elder fiduciary specialist. I met with her because someone was moving money around your accounts and attempting to isolate both of you from me before executing a refinance. I wanted to know how to stop it without humiliating you. My aunt's mouth fell open. Bethany blinked. Uncle Peter shifted his weight. Third, I said, the draft property forms you're waving around were never filed, never signed, and never intended for transfer. They were seated documents. Travis frowned. Seated what? I leaned back in the chair. A leak test. The words dropped into the room like a pane of glass shattering underwater. Quiet, but final. You're lying, he snapped too fast. No, I said. I created 3 slightly different draft packets, each with an invisible metadata tag and a distinct clerical error. One version said lane instead of road in the property description. One listed the parcel map book reference incorrectly. Please subscribe my channel. And one mislabeled the supplemental rider as Exhibit D. The copy you printed this morning contains the Exhibit D error, which means it came from the file I left, deliberately, on Mom's desktop after you borrowed her laptop charger on April 22nd. Kelsey closed her eyes. Travis's hand tightened on the paper. That proves nothing. It proves you found exactly what I wanted you to find. My father finally sat down. Not gracefully. More like his knees had decided something before the rest of him had caught up. Aunt Miriam looked from him to Travis and back again. Richard? He didn't answer. I turned my phone over and unlocked it. The screen light threw a blue-white shine across the polished table. Would you like stacked, or one at a time? No one spoke. Stacked it is. I opened the first folder. This is the message metadata for the text I received this morning from Mom's number. It was sent from her phone. Yes, but the phone was unlocked at 7-Eleven using face recognition failure override and passcode entry after 2 failed attempts. Mom never uses the passcode unless the phone restarts. The failed face scans were logged at an angle inconsistent with her height. Bethany frowned. What does that mean? It means somebody else held the phone. Travis made a disgusted sound. That is insane. Is it? I enlarged the screenshot and rotated it toward the room. Because the device location ping at 7:12 places the phone in the front sitting room. Mom was in the shower then. She told me that herself on Thursday when we discussed her breakfast plans for today. My mother's head came up. She looked at Travis. Just once. But it was enough. He shifted immediately. You can't prove who sent it. I can prove who was awake, downstairs, and accessing her devices at 7:10 every Sunday for the last 5 Sundays, I said. You. Because your Bluetooth headphones auto-paired to her kitchen speaker system on every one of those dates, including this morning. The color drained from his face so quickly it looked as if someone had pulled a sheet over him. That was Revelation 1. I gave them 3 seconds to absorb it, then opened the next file. Revelation 2. These transfers you attributed to me? They route through Hale Home Solutions, LLC, before landing in an account ending in 0442. That LLC was dissolved 2 years ago. The 0442 account belongs to Travis Hale. Travis slammed both hands on the table. Crystal rattled. That's not true. It is, I said calmly, because your wife provided the tax documents. Every head in the room turned to Kelsey. She still hadn't touched the coffee. Kel, Travis said, and his voice did something ugly in the middle. Not quite a crack. Not quite a snarl. What did she just say? Kelsey lifted her chin slowly. The morning light from the kitchen window caught the faint purple shadow under one eye she'd hidden with concealer. I said I was done helping you explain things away. For one strange second, nobody moved. Even Aunt Miriam looked stunned. Then everything broke at once. You stupid, Travis started. Do not finish that sentence, I said quietly. He turned on me instead. You've been poisoning her against me. Kelsey gave a short laugh with no humor in it. Travis, you used my father's old business paperwork to funnel money out of your parents' accounts and told me it was temporary. Then you used our son's college savings to plug the gap when Elena started asking questions. Nobody had to poison me. I can read. My father stood up again, so abruptly his chair legs screeched against the floor. Kelsey, this is a family matter. She met his eyes for the first time. Exactly. That was Revelation 2. I opened the third folder. Revelation 3, I said. On April 29th at 8:43 p.m., there was a discussion in this house about getting Mom to sign a durable power of attorney revision while she was medicated after her dental procedure. There is audio. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father went very still. Travis looked at the phone as if it were a snake. You recorded us, Aunt Miriam whispered, more offended by evidence than by what it proved. No, I said. Your own security system did. I tapped the file. My father's voice came through the speaker first, muffled but unmistakable. Just needs to sign where Travis tabs it. Then Travis. If Elena sees the refinance packet, she'll start another audit. Then my mother, groggy and certain. I don't want Elena upset. Then my father again, crisp and impatient. Elena doesn't need to know everything. The silence afterward had weight. It settled over the room like wet wool. Nobody breathed for a second. Aunt Miriam actually sat down without meaning to, one hand catching the table edge. Bethany stared at Travis with naked fascination. Uncle Peter looked sick. My mother was the one who broke. She pressed both hands flat to the tablecloth, white linen bunching under her fingers, and whispered, Richard. Not loud, not dramatic. Somehow that made it worse. My father recovered first. He always did. He lifted his chin, gathered the shreds of authority around himself, and said, You have no right to come into our home and stage this. I almost admired the audacity. I closed the audio file. Actually, I said, you were committing elder financial exploitation, attempted coercive signing, and bank fraud. In Massachusetts. In a house with a monitored security system and a paper trail. That was the line where the power shifted. You could feel it physically, like pressure dropping before a storm. Travis looked around the room for someone to stand with him and found nobody. Aunt Miriam suddenly became very interested in straightening a napkin. Bethany stepped back from the table. Uncle Peter removed his glasses and polished them pointlessly with his tie. My father pointed at my phone. Delete that. No. Delete it. I held his gaze. No. My mother was crying now, but quietly, as if she was embarrassed by the sound of it. Kelsey moved toward her with a napkin, then hesitated. My mother took it anyway. What do you want? My father asked. That question always reveals more than people intend. I stood up slowly and reached for my coat. The movement made them all tense again, but not in the same way as before. Before, they'd been waiting for me to lose control. Now they were afraid of what controlled looked like. I want this handled formally, I said. Tomorrow morning at 10. Blackwell Price LLP, Conference Suite 4. You, Mom. Travis, separate counsel if you're smart. Bring every device you've used to access their accounts, every loan document, every tax return for Hale Home Solutions, and every unsigned paper you thought you could slip past her. My father laughed once, harsh and disbelieving. You think you can summon us? I picked up the untouched box of lemon muffins from the foyer table and tucked it under one arm. The scent of citrus and sugar rose faintly through the cardboard, absurdly sweet in that bitter room. I don't think, I said. I know. Then I turned to my mother. Mom, if you want help, come tomorrow. If you don't, I will still file what I have. Her shoulders shook once. She nodded without looking up. I walked to the door. Behind me I heard Travis start. Elena, wait. I paused with my hand on the brass knob but didn't turn around. Save it, I said. And next time, if you're going to forge concern, at least write the text yourself. Outside, the May air hit my face cool and green, carrying cut grass, wet soil, and the faint sugar scent from the bakery 2 streets over. I walked to my car without rushing. My hands were steady on the keys. They thought they had cornered me with a family scene. They had no idea I was taking them somewhere scenes didn't matter. The next 24 hours moved with a strange, suspended clarity that comes after a collision. I didn't cry. People always expect that part when they hear the story, as if betrayal only counts when it leaves visible water behind. But grief, at least for me, was never loud. It was administrative. It sat down beside me while I organized files, printed exhibits, flagged timelines, and transferred encrypted backups to Naomi Velez's case portal. At 2:14 that afternoon, my father left a voicemail. You are not to involve outside parties in private family matters. At 2:22, Travis sent, you're making a huge mistake. At 3:01, my mother texted only 2 words. I'm sorry. I did not answer any of them. I archived everything. Naomi met me at her office at 8 the next morning. Blackwell Price occupied the 23rd floor of a glass tower on Federal Street, and their reception area smelled faintly of espresso, wool carpet, and lemon oil from the wood credenza beneath a wall of abstract blue paintings. The conference room she'd reserved was all dark walnut, brushed steel, and leather chairs that were meant to make people sit straighter than they wanted to. Morning light poured through the windows in clean rectangles, catching on water carafes and legal pads. Power has its own textures: polished wood, heavy doors, frosted glass, silence that costs by the hour. Naomi wore a charcoal suit with a narrow silver watch and the expression of a woman who had already won 3 arguments before breakfast. Beside her sat Aaron Pike, a retired state investigator she used for fraud matters. Compact, gray-haired, legal pads centered exactly parallel to the edge of the table. Methodical men like him are dangerous because they do not need theatrics. Facts are enough. You slept. Naomi asked. Enough. You ready? I looked at the exhibit binders stacked in front of me. Blue tabs, date labels, account flow diagrams. The timeline chart Aaron had created after midnight was clipped to the top of the first file. Yes, I said. At 9:57, my family arrived. The difference between the dining room and that boardroom was almost beautiful. My father, who had filled my mother's house the day before as if volume itself made him right, came in smaller somehow. Navy blazer buttoned too tight. Eyes bloodshot. He kept one hand on the back of my mother's chair as though still trying to steer her. But Mom had changed too. She wore a cream blouse, no cardigan, hair pulled back neatly, and for the first time in months she carried her own handbag instead of letting him keep things organized for her. Travis entered last with his attorney, a glossy-haired litigator named Daniel Kay, whose confidence looked rented. Kelsey came separately, not with Travis, and sat beside Naomi instead of beside her husband. That was the moment Travis understood the floor beneath him was less stable than he believed. He stopped mid-step. His face tightened. His jaw made that little side movement it always did when he realized charm wasn't going to be enough. Aunt Miriam did not come. Neither did Bethany. Cowards always discover boundaries when consequences develop teeth. Naomi waited until everyone was seated. Then she folded her hands on the table and said, "We are here because Ms. Elena Hale has provided substantial documentary evidence suggesting a coordinated effort to isolate Richard and Donna Hale, manipulate access to their assets, and obtain signatures under impaired circumstances. Today's meeting is an opportunity to resolve this before formal referrals are made. Daniel K. leaned back with a scoffing smile. That is an extremely dramatic characterization. Aaron slid a single page across the table. This is the banking trace. Daniel glanced down. The smile left first. Then the color. That room held light differently than my parents' dining room had. Softer. Colder. The kind that made every expression look honest by force. My father tried to clear his throat and couldn't quite manage it on the first attempt. Naomi began at the beginning. Not the emotional beginning. The legal one. The one courts believe. January 12th, she said, turning one tab. Password reset requested on Donna Hale's primary checking account. Reset confirmation sent to an email alias created 3 days earlier under the name D. Hale family. Turn. January 19th. Automated transfer of $800 to Hale Home Solutions, LLC. Turn. February 6th, 18 and March 3rd. Additional transfers totaling $1,700 routed through the same dissolved entity. Turn. March 14th. Attempted credit inquiry connected to a home equity line application. Turn. April 22nd. Access to document folder on Donna Hale's desktop using Travis Hale's authenticated device. Turn. April 29th. Audio capture from residential security system referencing a planned signature event during post-procedure medication. Turn. May 10th. Fraudulent exclusionary text sent from Donna Hale's phone to Elena Hale prior to attempted public confrontation. There is something uniquely terrifying about hearing your own scheme arranged into dates. Not accusations. Dates. It turns bad behavior into architecture. My father stared at the timeline chart as if forcible could blur the print. Travis kept glancing at Daniel, waiting for some magician's objection that never came. My mother read every line with her lips parted slightly. Kelsey sat very still, both hands around a closed notebook. Daniel finally said, "This doesn't establish intent." Aaron slid another packet across. "These are the refinance inquiry notes." Naomi did not miss a beat. "And these are the text screenshots from Travis Hale to Kelsey Hale on March 17th and April 30th discussing, quote, getting the house papered before Elena makes a federal case out of it." Travis whipped toward Kelsey. "You gave them our texts." "No," Kelsey said in a voice so even it made his sound childish. "I gave them the backup. Your phone gave them the texts." He stared at her, stunned. "You backed up my phone." "You backed it up to the family laptop," she replied. "You just never changed the sync settings." That was the first fracture. The second came 10 minutes later, and it hit harder because it came from a direction my father never anticipated. Naomi looked at me once. I nodded. She said, "Before we continue, there is another person joining us." The conference room door opened. In walked Valerie Chun. For 3 years, Valerie had been my parents' in-home bookkeeper 2 afternoons a week. Quiet, immaculate, always in structured blouses and low heels, with a habit of filing every receipt by color-coded category. My father trusted her because she never interrupted him. My mother trusted her because she remembered every birthday in the family. Travis ignored her, which in his world counted as a form of kindness. Valerie took the empty chair near Aaron and placed a slim black folder on the walnut table. My father blinked twice. "Valerie!" She looked at him with professional calm. "Mr. Hale, what is this?" "This," Naomi said, "is the unexpected part." Valerie opened the folder and removed copies of ledger notes, reimbursement requests, and a yellow legal pad page in my father's slanted handwriting. In February, Mr. Hale instructed me to stop mailing paper account summaries to Mrs. Hale and instead deliver them to his study. In March, Mr. Travis Hale requested I classify 3 transfers as renovation deposits despite there being no active renovation contract. When I asked for supporting invoices, I received 2 PDFs with mismatched fonts and metadata showing they'd been edited on an iPhone at 11:48 p.m. Daniel pinched the bridge of his nose. My father's face hardened. "You were paid to keep records, not spy." Valerie didn't flinch. "I was paid to keep accurate records." "Then why are you here?" Travis demanded. She met his eyes. "Because your mother once helped my mother after a stroke when we couldn't afford daytime nursing. She sat with her 3 afternoons a week for a month and never told anyone. I wasn't going to help you strip her accounts while she thanked you for bringing soup. That was the ally reveal, and it did exactly what truth always does when it arrives from someone underestimated. It changed the room's center of gravity. My mother looked at Valerie as if seeing her for the first time. Then she looked at my father. "You stopped my mail." "Donna," he began, palms lifting, voice going soft with false patience. "That was just to simplify." She turned to Travis. "And you were taking money." "It was temporary," he shot back. "I told you it was temporary." "You told me nothing," she said. The room shifted again. My father pointed at me across the table. This is exactly what she wanted. She wanted to turn everyone against us. I had been quiet for nearly 40 minutes by then, letting professionals do what professionals do. But that sentence belonged to me. "No," I said. "I wanted you to see them." Every eye in the room turned. I folded my hands in front of me. "I wanted you to see the dates, the movements, the way every lie required the next one. I wanted you to see that the text wasn't the betrayal. It was just the part careless enough to leave fingerprints." Travis laughed bitterly. "You planned this?" "Yes," I said. "I did." My father looked almost relieved to hear that, as if my admission of strategy restored some moral symmetry he could live with. Naomi broke that illusion immediately. "Planning a response to suspected fraud is not misconduct, Mr. Hale. It is called due diligence." Aaron passed around another sheet. "We also have geolocation and device correlation placing Travis Hale at the residence during each unauthorized access event." Daniel scanned it. "My client denies." "Your client can deny whatever he likes," Naomi said. "But denial will become more difficult once subpoenas issue and the Commonwealth reviews the audio." That was when Travis turned on my father. "This was your idea," he snapped. "You said Elena wouldn't go public." My father's head whipped toward him. "Because you said the money could be replaced before she noticed. You said Mom would sign anything if you framed it as tax planning." My mother made a sound then, low and shocked, as if something inside her had been split cleanly in two. Daniel sat back. "I am going to advise my client not to continue speaking." "Too late," Naomi said. Kelsey opened her notebook and slid a single page toward Naomi. Naomi passed it down the table without comment. It was a list of dates and amounts in Kelsey's neat handwriting. March 21st, $2,400 transfer, Travis said temporary bridge. April 2nd, $5,000 from 529 withdrawn, said Dad will fix. April 27th, refinance mention after dental procedure. Travis looked at her like he didn't recognize her. Maybe he didn't. Men like him rarely do once the women around them stop absorbing impact and start recording it. "Why?" he said, almost whispering. "Please subscribe my channel, thanks." My father looked almost relieved to hear that, as if my admission of strategy restored some moral symmetry he could live with. Naomi broke that illusion immediately. "Planning a response to suspected fraud is not misconduct, Mr. Hale. It is called due diligence." Aaron passed around another sheet. "We also have geolocation and device correlation placing Travis Hale at the residence during each unauthorized access event." Daniel scanned it. "My client denies." "Your client can deny whatever he likes," Naomi said. "But denial will become more difficult once subpoenas issue and the Commonwealth reviews the audio." That was when Travis turned on my father. "This was your idea," he snapped. "You said Elena wouldn't go public." My father's head whipped toward him. "Because you said the money could be replaced before she noticed. You said Mom would sign anything if you framed it as tax planning." My mother made a sound then, low and shocked, as if something inside her had been split cleanly in two. Daniel sat back. "I am going to advise my client not to continue speaking." "Too late," Naomi said. Kelsey opened her notebook and slid a single page toward Naomi. Naomi passed it down the table without comment. It was a list of dates and amounts in Kelsey's neat handwriting. March 21st, $2,400 transfer, Travis said temporary bridge. April 2nd, $5,000 from 529 withdrawn, said Dad will fix. April 27th, refinance mention after dental procedure. Travis looked at her like he didn't recognize her. Maybe he didn't. Men like him rarely do once the women around them stop absorbing impact and start recording it. "Why?" he said, almost whispering. Kelsey's answer was simple. "Because our son is 8, and I'm not teaching him this is what family means." There are moments when a room full of adults regresses into their truest ages. My father became a boy caught breaking something and angry he'd been seen. Travis became a teenager blaming everyone else for the car keys in his pocket. My mother became a woman realizing the script she'd lived inside had been handed to her by men who mistook dependence for devotion. And I, for the first time in my life, did not become the fixer. Naomi laid out the choices with professional precision. Option 1, she said, we adjourn and file today. That includes civil action for restitution, petition for emergency financial conservatorship review, and referrals to Adult Protective Services, the bank's fraud division, and the district attorney. Option 2, you cooperate fully. Immediate written admissions limited to financial handling, return of all accessed funds, surrender of devices for imaging, withdrawal of any pending credit or refinance inquiries, revocation of Travis Hale's access to all parental accounts, and appointment of an independent fiduciary monitor for 90 days. My father's nostrils flared. You can't demand that in a family matter. Naomi's expression never changed. This stopped being a family matter when you falsified account pathways. Daniel whispered something to Travis, who shook his head violently. My mother sat with both hands flat on the table again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was anchoring. Donna, my father said, lowering his voice, trying to bring her back under his orbit. We can handle this ourselves. She looked at him for a very long second. The city reflected faintly in the conference room glass behind her, all silver lines and pale sky. No, she said. You handled enough. I will never forget the look on his face. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was naked. 50 years of being obeyed, interrupted. Travis stood up. This is insane. We are not signing anything. Naomi didn't glance up from the settlement packet. Then sit down and call your criminal counsel. He remained standing another beat, breathing hard through his nose, then sat. Sometimes victory doesn't sound like cheering. Sometimes it sounds like leather creaking under the weight of people forced to reckon with themselves. The signing took 2 hours. There were revisions, arguments. Daniel objected to phrasing. My father demanded softer language around intent. Naomi refused. Aaron documented device serial numbers, while Valerie cross-referenced reimbursement entries. My mother corrected 3 dates from memory with a steadiness that stunned me. Kelsey signed her affidavit without looking at Travis once. At one point, Daniel muttered that the seated documents bordered on entrapment. I looked at him and said, next time, make sure they're not working from the file you were supposed to steal. He did not appreciate that. By 1:43 p.m., the core terms were executed. Immediate restitution schedule. Formal revocation of Travis's access. Consent to independent review. Written acknowledgement that the Mother's Day accusations had no factual basis. Agreement that any statement previously made to family members alleging theft by me would be retracted in writing. My father hesitated over the retraction line. Naomi slid the pen closer. Or we litigate. He signed. My mother signed next, her hand steady. Travis signed last, pressing so hard the pen left an imprint through 3 sheets beneath it. When it was over, people gathered their papers with the stunned, mechanical movements of survivors, leaving a crash site. Daniel escorted Travis out first. Travis tried once to look back at me, not with apology, not even with hatred exactly, but with a kind of bewildered resentment, as if he still believed I had violated some sacred family rule by refusing to be the one quietly hurt. My father stayed standing at the far end of the table, document folder under his arm, tie loosened. He looked older than he had the day before. You've made your point, he said. I stood, smoothing the sleeve of my blazer. No. He frowned. Then what is this? This, I said, is your bill. My mother closed her eyes. I picked up my bag. At the door, I turned once more, not to him, but to the room itself, the walnut table, the leather chairs, the soft hum of central air, the city stretched beyond glass. Then I said the one thing I knew would land where it needed to. Happy Mother's Day. And I left him sitting in the wreckage of his own authority. The next few weeks were noisier than the confrontation itself. Truth tends to move in concentric circles. First the people in the room, then the people they call, then the people who had been waiting, quietly, for permission to admit something felt wrong all along. The family retraction email went out on Wednesday evening at 6:18 p.m. I know because Bethany forwarded it to 3 cousins before 6:30, and by 9 that night my phone had collected 11 unread messages ranging from awkward solidarity to naked curiosity. My Aunt Miriam sent, I only repeated what Richard told me. Uncle Peter sent, I'm sorry. I should have said something Sunday. Pastor Lee sent a carefully worded note about healing and misunderstandings that told me exactly how much of the original ambush he had believed. I answered none of them that night. I was busy sitting on my apartment balcony with my shoes off, listening to traffic 3 stories below and feeling the full-body exhaustion that comes after you've held yourself together through something that could have split you open. The city was turning gold at the edges. A siren moved somewhere far off. My untouched lemon muffins sat inside on the counter like evidence from another life. 6 weeks later, the mornings felt different. I had moved out of my South End rental into a sunlit condo in Charlestown with wide oak floors and a narrow balcony that caught the first clean strip of light over the harbor. On the first Monday in July, I stood barefoot in my kitchen wearing soft gray pajamas and watched steam rise from my coffee into the pale blue morning. The quartz countertop was cool under my fingertips. A bowl of peaches sat by the window. Outside, the brick facades across the street glowed warm in the early sun. That was the first morning I realized I could breathe in my own life again. Justice, real justice, is rarely a single hammer blow. It's an inventory. Travis lost his job at Mercer Automotive in June after the internal compliance review he'd sworn would be no big deal turned up expense padding tied to the same LLC he'd used on my parents' accounts. Not criminally charged, in the end, because restitution came quickly and first offender status buys a lot in white-collar circles if you look enough like remorse. But he was fired, professionally marked, and suddenly too qualified for the jobs that returned his calls and too compromised for the ones he wanted. Last I heard, he was consulting independently, which in Travis language meant borrowing confidence against an empty calendar. My father resigned from the board of his country club before they could ask for it publicly. Then he stepped down from the church finance committee, citing stress. The real reason, of course, was that Valerie's documentation didn't stay contained as neatly as he'd hoped. Not because I spread it. I didn't have to. Men who build their reputations out of trust lose control of the narrative the second documents start contradicting their voices. Concord is a town with expensive hedges and very porous gossip. My mother, ironically, faced the hardest social consequence, not because she had engineered the scheme, but because women in families like mine are always expected to know everything that happens around them and absorb the blame for failing to prevent it. Invitations thinned. Sympathy came wrapped in judgment. 3 women from church brought casseroles and left with sharper opinions than they arrived with. She called me once after one of those visits and said, very quietly, I didn't realize how many people preferred me ornamental. That sentence stayed with me. Aunt Miriam discovered, to her horror, that repeating defamation on behalf of your brother makes your own daughters less interested in telling you their private business. Bethany learned that being first with a rumor means you are also first in line when people start tracing where it came from. Pastor Lee preached a sermon on guarding one's tongue that would have been moving if I'd believed self-awareness was involved. And Kelsey filed for separation. That part was not a surprise. The surprise was how little drama attended it. No broken vases. No public scenes. Just paperwork, parenting schedules, and a small rental in Lexington with a backyard her son could still kick a ball around in. She moved like someone stepping off a ship after being sick at sea too long. Unsteady at first, then better every week. The communication attempts from my father came in phases. First outrage. You have embarrassed this family. You let outsiders weaponize private information. You owe your mother an apology for the stress. Then bargaining. Let's have dinner. Just us. This has gone far enough. If you cared about your mother, you'd stop feeding the gossip. Then the softest, and therefore the ugliest, phase. Nostalgia. I miss when things were simpler. Your mother keeps looking for your car out front. The family isn't the same. I archive them all. Travis called 3 times from numbers I didn't recognize. The first voicemail was angry. The second was slurred. The third was the closest he came to honesty. I know you think I'm the villain, he said, voice rough and low. But you always made me feel like I had to win something in this family. You were always the competent one. That message sat in my inbox for a week before I saved it to the case file and deleted it from the phone. Explanation is not absolution. Pain is not permission. My mother texted more sparingly. Updates at first. Valerie, says the monitor approved the account changes. The hydrangeas finally bloomed. I found the recipe card you wanted. Gradually, the messages became more like real conversation. Not because everything was fixed. It wasn't. But because for the first time in my life, she was trying to speak without checking whether my father would approve the tone. 3 months after the conference room, I started my own firm. Not a law firm. I'm not an attorney. But skill has a way of revealing itself under pressure, and mine turned out not to be surviving family chaos. It was seeing systems clearly when other people were blinded by love, loyalty, or fear. So I built Hale Advisory Group, a consulting practice focused on family financial transparency, caregiver documentation, and elder vulnerability audits. Not glamorous, not loud, just useful. The kind of work people only realize they need right before or right after catastrophe. Naomi sent my first 3 clients. One was a retired professor whose son had borrowed against her annuity. One was a widower whose new companion was quietly replacing the names on subscription and utility accounts before moving toward larger assets. One was a pair of sisters who loved each other deeply but had managed to weaponize a mother's memory care plan into open warfare. I was good at it, maybe because I knew the terrain from both sides now. Not just the paper, the pulse beneath it. Every Thursday, I worked from a corner table at Harborline Cafe in Charlestown, where the walnut counter stayed warm from afternoon sun and the barista with the silver nose ring always drew a little fern in my cappuccino foam. One afternoon in September, Kelsey sat across from me there with an iced tea and a stack of school forms for her son. "You won't believe who I just saw," she said. The phrase had become our unofficial drumroll for karma updates. "Who?" "Your Aunt Miriam at Home Goods," Kelsey said, lowering her voice even though nobody was listening. She saw me, turned a corner so fast she almost clipped an end cap, and then texted me 5 minutes later asking whether Travis had said anything concerning lately. I laughed, really laughed, the kind that loosens your shoulders. "What did you say?" I said, "Concerning is a broad category." We both smiled over that. There was something quietly miraculous about Kelsey and me becoming friends. Not instant friends. Not the dishonest, performative kind forged in shared hatred. Real ones. Slow. Practical. Built out of childcare pickups. Exchanged vendor recommendations. Long texts about school forms. And the occasional silence that didn't need explanation. She told me once, over takeout tie on my balcony while the harbor wind lifted the paper napkins, "I used to think staying calm meant keeping everyone else comfortable. Watching you taught me it can mean keeping yourself intact." I didn't know what to say to that then. I think I just handed her another spring roll and looked away long enough to hide how much it touched me. In October, my mother came to see the condo. She arrived alone. That deserves its own line because in my family, my mother driving into Boston alone on a weekday might as well have been a woman crossing a border with a new passport. She wore camel slacks, sensible flats, and a rust-colored scarf I had never seen before. Something she had chosen for herself, I realized. Not something purchased because it was acceptable, flattering, appropriate, or on sale. The late morning light made the whole place glow. She walked slowly through the living room, fingertips brushing the back of the linen sofa, the ceramic lamp, the edge of the bookshelf as if taking inventory of a life she hadn't been invited into before. "It's peaceful," she said. "It is." She stood by the balcony doors, looking out toward the water. "Your father hates that word." "I know." She gave a small smile at that. Then it faded. "I did send the text," she said finally. "Not the words." But I pressed send. I leaned against the kitchen counter and waited. "I knew it sounded wrong," she continued. "I knew you'd know. And some part of me thought maybe if you came anyway," her voice thinned, "maybe it would force something." The honesty of that hurt more than the original message had. "Did you want me there?" I asked. She turned from the window and looked at me fully. "Always. People talk about forgiveness as if it arrives like a sunrise. Clean. Total. Mine didn't. Mine came like physical therapy. Repetition. Tiny restored movements. Pain with purpose. I did not rush across the room and cry in her arms. That would have been easier, cleaner, more cinematic. Instead, I poured us both coffee into thick white mugs and said, "Then next time, say the thing you mean." She took the mug in both hands and nodded. That was the beginning. Not of forgetting, of rebuilding with visible seams. By winter, my father had stopped pretending the problem was public embarrassment and started circling the real wound. I had stepped outside the family system and survived. Men like him can absorb disobedience. What they cannot tolerate is proof that the structure does not collapse when a woman stops holding it up. He asked to meet twice. I declined twice. On the third try, I agreed to lunch at a hotel restaurant in Cambridge with glass walls, white tablecloths, and a pianist who played jazz standards so softly they felt like someone else's memory. My father arrived 10 minutes early in a charcoal overcoat and sat with his back rigidly straight, as if posture could still negotiate on his behalf. He didn't order wine. That told me more than anything he said. For the first 20 minutes, he kept trying to stage manage the conversation. About my work, about the market, about how retirement had given him perspective. Then, because time eventually wears arrogance into fatigue, he stopped performing. I didn't think you would go that far, he said. I know. I thought you'd cool off. I know. He looked down at his folded napkin. You always had a taste for proving points. There are sentences people use because their pride cannot survive the cleaner version. He could not say you were right, so he said that. I stirred my tea once. The spoon touched porcelain with a small, clear chime. I didn't prove a point, I said. I proved a pattern. He looked at me for a long moment. His face had thinned over the winter. His hands, once so certain on steering wheels and dinner tables and church ledgers, looked older than the rest of him now. Do you hate me? He asked. No, I said, and it was true. But I see you. That landed harder till we finished lunch politely. When we stood, he reached for the check and I let him. Not because I needed him to pay, because some tiny old ritual can be allowed to survive if it no longer contains power. At the door, he said, Your mother says you're doing good work. I am. He nodded once. Then he left. I walked back through the hotel lobby under amber pendant lights and over black and white marble tile, and I realized the shaking I'd feared never came. The little girl in me had always thought facing him honestly would feel like standing under a blade. It didn't. It felt like weather. Significant, but survivable. 6 months after Mother's Day, Naomi invited me to a small rooftop gathering after a mediation victory. Please subscribe. Kelsey came too. So did Valerie, to my delight. She wore a deep green coat and accepted a glass of sparkling water as if she had been attending lawyer rooftops all her life. We stood near the edge under strings of warm white lights, eating truffle fries from paper cones and talking about everything except disaster. At one point, Kelsey clinked her glass lightly against mine. To documentation, she said dryly. Valerie added, to backups. Naomi smiled. To women who notice things. I lifted my glass. To all of the above. The toast was small, casual, nothing anybody would photograph. That made it perfect. Closure, I learned, is rarely grand. More often it is a Tuesday-level piece arriving on an ordinary evening while city lights turn on one window at a time. Later that night, after the others had drifted toward the heater and the conversation softened into warmth and fragments, Kelsey and I stood alone at the railing for a minute. The wind smelled like salt and steel. Below us, headlights moved over the bridge in clean silver lines. Do you ever think about how differently this could have gone? She asked. All the time. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I almost stayed. I looked at her. I know. And you almost didn't come that morning. Yes. We both stared out at the harbor. Funny, she said, how whole lives turn on the moment you decide not to obey something that feels wrong. It was a simple sentence. It deserved the silence that followed. That evening, when I got home, the sunset had already drained into that deep blue hour where the city becomes all window light and reflected gold. I changed into a soft sweater, took my tea out to the balcony, and sat wrapped in a blanket while the final band of orange dimmed behind the roofs. The railing was cool under my fingers. Somewhere below, somebody laughed. A dog barked twice. The air tasted like coming winter. I thought about who I had been before all of it. Not weak, never weak, but arranged around other people's comfort, useful in ways that made me easy to rely on and easier still to dismiss. I had spent years mistaking reliability for belonging, thinking if I solved enough problems, anticipated enough moods, filled enough gaps, I would finally become unshakable inside my own family. What I know now is harsher and kinder than that. Families do not always reward the person who keeps them running. Sometimes they resent her for noticing where the machinery grinds. I was naive once. Not because I trusted. Trust itself is not naive. I was naive because I believed composure meant endurance alone. That dignity meant taking the blow cleanly and privately. That love, especially the kind stitched through blood and history and ritual, would eventually recognize its own best steward. Now I know better. Composure is not passive. It is strategic. It is choosing when to speak, what to document, where to stand, and which door to close behind you. It is understanding that silence can be a sanctuary, but it can also be a weapon people use against you if you never interrupt it with truth. There are nights now when I think of my father at the head of that mahogany table, my brother with his forged proof, my mother looking down at her own hands, and I feel something stranger than anger. Gratitude, in a shape I never would have recognized before. Not gratitude for the humiliation, not for the betrayal, for the forced clarity, for the way they pushed every hidden crack into daylight until I had no choice but to stop calling it weather and start calling it architecture. Sometimes the people who try hardest to reduce you end up introducing you to your full size. A week before Christmas, my mother sent me a picture of the dining room table set for dinner. Fewer place settings this time. Different chairs, because she'd sold the old upholstered ones and chosen simpler oak frames herself. In the middle sat a low arrangement of winter greens and white roses. No performance. No spectacle. Just space prepared honestly. Under the photo she wrote, "If you come, I'd like it to be real." I stared at that message a long time with the tree lights reflecting softly in my living room windows. Then I wrote back, "So would I." And I meant it. I still keep the screenshot of the original text in an archived folder. Not because I live there. Because I don't. It reminds me of the hinge my life turned on. 3 cold words and 1 colder sentence. A dismissal that became a door. Sometimes, when new clients sit across from me twisting rings, or smoothing napkins, or apologizing for feeling suspicious of the people who claim to love them most, I tell them to trust the detail that won't leave them alone. The phrase that sounds wrong. The transfer nobody can explain cleanly. The invitation that was never meant to include them. Truth often enters quietly, dressed as a discrepancy. The city was almost fully dark by then, the last orange ribbon gone from the horizon, every window around me holding its own soft square of life. I lifted my mug in the empty air, not to anyone present, but to the woman I had become and the one I had left behind. I didn't thank my family out loud. Some things are too private for speech. But in the stillness, I thanked them anyway, for underestimating me, for mistaking calm for weakness, for giving me the exact pressure I needed to discover what in me would not break. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about making people suffer. It's about becoming someone they can never diminish again. And if I've learned anything worth keeping, it's this. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about making them pay. It's about building a life so clear, so steady, and so fully your own that their betrayal becomes the smallest thing about your story.